the traffic was going up again. It's really quiet tonight.
Okay, all set.
Let's see what I started. I guess we're ready.
I say you didn't have to use your new pad tonight.
No, I limited
Don't
myself.
read without the box of some of those
Micros. Yeah, I hope I can present this in some kind of intelligent format here, because it's a tremendous amount of information. And to analyze it in 3 days and get it summarized is a little bit much, so I'll do my best with it. And I hope I can get the meaning across there. And people aren't seated yet. Can we wait till they're seated?
Sure.
Wait, hold it. Ribbon, hold it. Kyle?
What?
Remember what I said?
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming this evening. This evening I would like to present some information to you that is very, very new. It was given to me about 3 days ago. And in order for me to convey to you the importance of the message that was given to me, I need to take you through some history on certain things that have appeared now and then in our mythological stories and things that have emerged within our history that nobody really knew if they were real or not or what they represented. I was given information recently that made sense of a lot of things for me, and I'm hoping that by the end of this presentation I can get that meaning across to you, at least in a small way, so you can understand the significance of the information that has been given. Okay, in the last class we got into a little bit about the very early history of our lineage, and that no, we didn't come out of apes, that we had started our evolution on a planet called Terra about 560 million years ago, and Terra was located in something called Harmonic Universe 2. So we'll pick up from there in this class, and then through the course of our discussion tonight, I'll bring you up to the present time and the new information that was given to me that directly affects what is happening on our planet right now. Okay, just for a quick recap, this is a very quick diagram of a 15-dimensional matrix. All right, have dimensions 1 through 3, 4 through 5, 4, 5, and 6 actually, 7, 8, and 9, 10 through 12, and 13 through 15. Alright, the only thing we need to know for this discussion this evening is that each group of 3 dimensions creates something called a harmonic universe, and reality fields take place within that harmonic universe. Now, right now, our Earth is positioned in what is called harmonic universe 1. It's composed of the frequency patterns of dimensions 1, 2, and 3. When we speak of our origins as beginning on Terra, all those many years ago, we're talking about harmonic universe 2, which is the reality field that takes place in dimensions 4, 5, and 6. It's a higher vibrating universe than what we're in right now. What we are going to get into tonight is what our relationship is to that planet Terra that's in the second harmonic universe, and how our planet Earth ended up down here in the first place. For we need to understand those things if we are going to understand the significance of certain other material. The material this will lead into tonight is called something the Secrets of Amenti. The Secrets of Amenti go way back through our history, through the Egyptian period, but even further back than that. And many people at different times were aware of something called the Halls of Amenti, but very few people knew what they were or what they represented. They just knew they were very secret, and they were guarded within the metaphysical traditions of many different philosophies, but nobody knew what they were or why they were important. In understanding our relationship between Terra and Earth, we'll be able to begin to understand what the Halls of Amenti represent. And in order to understand the significance of the information I was just given, it is going to be important to know what Amenti represents. Now, I will let the cat out of the bag in the beginning of the discussion, and then I will lead you back through a trail of why this is important and what it means to us today. I was told several days ago that something called the Ark of the Covenant had sparked. And I said, what is that? And what does that mean? Because my communicators seemed very, very excited about this. and it meant nothing to me on a conscious level. So I asked them to explain it to me, and they did. They put a whole new chapter in my book and explained to me things that some ancient part of me knew, but I didn't know. So we're dealing with a reality today of something called the Ark of the Covenant, whatever that is, having sparked, whatever that means. By the end of this discussion, we should be able to understand what that means and the significance it will have to us today. Quick run on history here. We covered a little bit of this before in the last class, but I'll just start there and work our way up. About 560 million years ago, on the planet Terra, the second harmonic universe, a race called the Tournisians were seeded by a large group of intergalactic beings from the harmonic 2 universe and also from the higher harmonic universes. There are 5. The beings that are in harmonic universes 3 and up are not in physical form anymore. They're evolved consciousness that are in pure energy form. So these beings from the higher harmonic universes motivated some of the beings within harmonic universe 2 who do have some form of physicality to create an experiment together in which a new race strain could be created. This race strain was very special because it was intended to be able to hold the whole energy pattern of an oversoul, not just a soul. So the Tournisian strain were created to be guardians of the planet Terra, and they were created, biologically speaking, in a way that would allow them to hold much more energy than most other races could. So all these races contributed their genetic imprint to the Tournisian strain. Okay, they evolved for quite a while on Terra. They were originally seeded, and this is right into our mythology here, our Christian story. They were seeded into a place. It was a continent that was called Eden. E/D-E-N. It was not Eden, it was Eden. That was the name of a continent that was on Terra at this time. So the race was seeded in there, and that's where our stories of the Garden of Eden come from. That's the garden they were referring to. It was on Terra. All right. Now, the Terran races evolved for about 8 million years, doing quite well. There were 12 sub-races within the racial strain, and they all carried the 12-strand DNA package. They were gods compared to us. They didn't reproduce like we do. They reproduced by fission or budding, where they could just replicate by combining energy fields. It was an awesome type of existence to be a Tournisian. They didn't die. They didn't have to. If their consciousness became bored with being in a body, they would simply demanifest it and leave. Okay. About 8 million years after they had evolved into very, very sophisticated cultures on Terra, there were interactions from other stellar groups from Harmonic Universe 2. They would visit, and they had an open stellar community, just like we have a lot of cities where lots of people pass through. Well, lots of intergalactic communities would pass through Terra at that time. By 8 million years ago, they started to digress because their gene codes got mixed with the gene codes of some of the other star people that they weren't originally intended to blend with. And because of the digression that occurred, certain separations occurred between, not only within the genetic code, but also between the belief systems of the people. And two primary groups began to faction out of the Tournisians. One were called the Alanians, and the other were called the Lumians. And they both coexisted on the continent of Eden, creating a culture called Alania and Lumia. The Alanians became, because of their more exaggerated intermixing with stellar groups, became much more aggressive than the Lumians. And they began to dominate the Lumians and make it very uncomfortable for them to be there. They also began to use technologies that were drawing energy from the core of Terra and using it in ways that was not in harmony with planetary physics. The Lumians were aware of this, and they knew it, and they knew something bad was going to come out of it, but the Alanians wouldn't listen, and they didn't, they just wanted to dominate the Lumian culture, and that was it. Okay. Because there was so much tension being created on Terra between these two groups, the Lumians asked something called the Sirian Council, which was from the star system Sirius. There is a star system Sirius in Harmonic Universe 2, just like we have star system Sirius. It's like its twin reflection in the higher dimensional field. The Syrian councils had been one of the original overseers of the Turanicium experiment because they had contributed a lot of genetic makeup to our experiment. So we are related to the Syrian cultures through our original gene codes. They asked the Syrian councils to help them with this problem that they were having with the Iranians. What could they do about this? And the council intervened and got involved with a group called the Elohim, which appear in our biblical stories. The Elohim were actually a group that were from Harmonic Universe 3, a higher harmonic universe. They were not physical. They were not even as physical as the Turaniciums. And they had been created by Lyran groups that were founders of a lot of the civilizations down here. So the Syrian Council and the Elohim got involved with the Lumanians or the Lumians that were having a problem with the Elanians on the continent of Eden. What came out of that was something called the Covenant of Pleiador, and the formation of a group called the Pleiadorians. The Pleiadorians started out as the Syrian Council giving permission and assistance to the Lumian people so they could move most of their race to a smaller continent that existed on Terra at that time, but it was not in a highly civilized state of being. There were beings on it, but they weren't highly civilized. So through the Syrian Council and the Elohim, the Lumians were given a way to get away from the Elanians and evolve in their own. They moved most of their people across the seas, and they took them to this new continent, and they named that continent Mu, and that's where our legends of Mu come from. They were not from Earth, they were from Terra. All right. There were other series of events that paralleled the Atlantean and Lemurian dramas that did occur on Earth, but Mu was on Terra, and that was that level of that part of our history. It came from Terra. Okay, so for quite a while, the Lumians evolved on Mu. They created something called the Council of Mu and set up their own governmental structures and all that kind of thing. They also set up something called the Priesthood of Mu, which was priests were male or female. They didn't make a gender distinction. But they were very focused on adhering to and teaching of the sacred law of one, which was unity consciousness, the understanding that we all come from the same source and that we're all related and have to work in harmony. So these things were set up, and they evolved for quite a while. But there was a problem with some of the strains. Just like a lot of the Elanians had mixed with the interstellar groups, so had the Lumians. So they didn't have a pure 12-strand DNA code anymore, and it was continuing to digress. So the Elohim and some other groups got involved, and they interbred with them, and they created a race called the Saras. The Saras basically purified the Lumian genetic code, so that race could continue to evolve rather than digress. Well, okay. At a certain point in the evolution of the people on Mu, there were things called the Syrian Rebellion broke out. And this broke out in Alania. The Alanians were run by something called the Templar Solar Initiates. They were a group of spiritual and political beings that were appointed originally by the Syrian Council to run things in Alania. Well, they decided to side with Syrian Anunnaki groups, which were a seed Syrian race, and the Syrian Anunnaki were rebelling against the Syrian Council, and they were trying to take over their own Sirius planetary system. The Templar Solar Initiates from Alania got involved with this and decided they would rebel against the Syrian Council too, and they would use power any way they wanted to. So the Syrian Rebellion broke out, and great hostilities broke out between the people of Mu and the people of Alania, because the Templar Solar Initiates wanted to take Mu and put it under their dominion. So there was many years of, I think it was about 40 or 50,000 years worth of this constant battle and push-pull between these two races. Finally, at one point, the Lumians were able to see, and the Saras were able to see that there was going to be a catastrophe that happened in the future because of the way the Elanians were using power from the Earth core. And they tried and made petitions to try to convince them to stop this. They tried to get the Syrian Council involved to stop it, but nobody could stop them. They were going to do what they wanted to anyway. Knowing this was going to occur, knowing that there was going to be a major explosion in the planetary grid that would very possibly wipe out all of them, they had to form another plan of what they could do. So the Lumians and the Saras and the Elohim and the Syrian Council and a number of other ET races that were sympathetic to this cause, including the Pleiadians from Harmonic Universe 2, got involved in something called the Covenant of Pleiador. This was a rescue mission that was designed before a rescue needed to be. They knew the event was going to occur, so they devised, before the event occurred on Terra, they devised a plan by which the souls that were lost, the people who were killed in this explosion of the grid, whose vibrational rate would fall and their soul essence would fragment into pieces all over the place down in the Harmonic Universe 1, they knew this would happen. And they knew they would have to be able to bring those souls back up, or they would be stuck in Harmonic Universe 1 from now until eternity. So that was part of the reason why they formed the Covenant of Pleiador, was to allow those souls that got trapped in time in the first Harmonic Universe following the explosion on Terra to evolve. But there was also another reason for the formation of it, and it gets into the physics of planetary grid structures. If you have a planet that is in, say, Harmonic 2, and part of that grid blows off, what that means is part of the morphogenetic field, the form-holding pattern for that planet, has been ripped away. In the case of Terra, the parts of the morphogenetic field that got ripped away ended up in Harmonic 1 universe. Once they emerged there, they separated into 12 different pieces and began to pull energy to them. It's a process called accretion, and they formed planetary bodies. They formed their own little solar system down in Harmonic 1 universe. But that left Terra without a portion of its morphogenetic field. Now, I won't get too much into the structure of how the harmonic universes relate to each other, but basically, upon entering the 15-dimensional matrix, what is created at the same time will be a morphogenetic field for whole planetary systems in the higher dimensions, and then from dimension 7 down, in the 3 harmonic universes, you will have one version of the planet in the 3rd harmonic universe, another version of it in the 2nd harmonic universe, and another in the 1st harmonic universe. So there's an evolutionary process that takes place here as planets ascend. It's dimensional ascension, and what it means is pulling in frequency into the grid pattern, and a grid pattern is made of chelons, which we talked about before. So anyway, when Terra did finally explode 550 million years ago, and a part of it was blown off, and a part of its morph field was lost, it could not evolve. It was stuck in the tracks of time within Harmonic Universe 2, until the time when it could reassemble those parts of its grid. It had to pull back in the portions of the morphogenetic field that had been lost in the explosion, or it would be stuck in time and it just would not evolve. There are many planets this has happened to, where they are literally stuck. They're called non-ascension planets, where they just stay there, and eventually, I think eventually they implode. I'm not really sure about the physics on that, but there's a process here. An ascension planet is a planet that still has its original energy connection to its morphogenetic field in the higher dimensions, which allows it to be able to ascend. So Terra was an ascension planet until the explosion happened. When the grid exploded and the energies ended up down in Harmonic Universe 1, this plan of rescue, not just for the people, but for the fragments of the morphogenetic field of Terra, had to be set in motion if any of them were going to be able to evolve. The Terrans needed us to evolve in order for them to evolve. So it was a very, very sacred covenant. It was assisted by beings from the highest levels, including the ones up in the dimension 15. There are entity beings up there. They assisted. A group called the Brunel assisted in this process. Also a group from the Galactic Core, which is about as high as you can go before you return to Source. It's out of the dimensionalized system. A group called the Rock Confederacy also helped set up this plan. So a rescue plan was made, and that was titled the Covenant of Pleiador. The Pleiadorians were the beings involved with fulfilling this rescue mission and this contract. Okay. Now, part of the process of the Covenant of Pleiador required the seeding, or the reseeding, of the morphogenetic field for the Turanicium race back onto Earth. So after the implosion occurred, they did a number of things that will be discussed in the book that are really too sophisticated for me to get into right now. I don't think I could off the top of my head. But it basically broke down into several stages of evolution. We started out coming here as a group of Pleiadorians, but we did not come here as Pleiadorians in body. We came here in energy essence. The Pleiadorians did something very interesting with the help of the ones from the Metagalactic Core. They were able to transmute the cellular codes in their body, turn themselves into a field of light, and then merge their energy together. And by doing that, they created a morphogenetic field that was composed of all their consciousness. This morphogenetic field became known as something called the sphere of Amenti. And what it did was hold the whole imprint for the evolution of the Turanicium race. What had to be done with the sphere of Amenti was it had to be placed down into the Earth grid, in the second dimension in Earth, and attached to the morphogenetic field piece that got ripped off from Terra when it blew. Because each of our planets ended up with a piece of that morph field. This new morph field, sphere of Amenti, had to be put in to the Earth core, and that would allow the souls who were part of that sphere to begin manifesting themselves into the lower harmonic universe 1. They were doing this as a favor to the souls who got blown apart in the implosion. What they would do was they would literally grow them bodies that they could attach to, so they didn't have to be lost in the elemental kingdoms from now until Kingdom Come. So with the Pleiadorians forming the sphere of Amenti and then beginning to birth themselves onto planet Earth, they allowed for the soul fragments of the others to accrete or pull in to their body pattern and evolve, and merge consciousness and evolve. They allowed them to re-evolve. So that was the plan. There were a number of stages to it, and it was a great plan if there wasn't a lot of things that happened in the meantime to hang up the plan where it had to be redone over and over and over again. Okay. Stage 1 began on Earth about 250 million years ago. And it went up to 25 million years ago. I got a 5 there. Okay. The first phase in this was 5 cloistered races were formed. All right, the morphogenetic field that was composed of the Pleiadorians broke into 5 pieces. And out of those 5 pieces, the energetic pattern, the imprint in energy, was formed for 5 different races that were like smaller parts of what the Pleiadorian Turanicium 1 imprint was. So they broke them down into 5 what they called cloistered races. The cloistered races carried among all of them together the whole 12-strand DNA package. So by evolving through each of those, souls could be pulled in and evolve into the cloistered races and then ascend by assembling through a couple of incarnations. They could assemble their DNA package and return back to Terra. And this was the first step in the plan. And what's interesting was because of the way that universal physics works, which I can't go into now because I probably couldn't explain it, they needed to be seated not on Earth first. They needed to be seated on Earth's anti-particle double. So the first stage of the race re-evolution plan were 5 cloistered races representing one of each of the different skin colors that became our skin colors here, were seated on parallel Earth. And they evolved there for a very long time. They evolved there between 250 million and 25 million years ago. It's a very long time to evolve. And they did well, and many souls ascended through them being there. The next stage in the plan started around 25 million years ago and took place between 25 and 20 million years ago. The first 2, what they call root races, were seated. And they were seated on the 7th dimensional version of our planet, which was Gaia. They were more etheric in nature. They didn't have physicality like we do. They were kind of like a ghost. If we looked at them, they would look like ghosts. But they were highly evolved, and they did something very special for us. Each one of the 2 first root races was responsible for bringing into the morphogenetic field 1/2 of the patterns, or the frequency patterns, for the first dimension, which was the first harmonic universe way down there. They grounded the morphogenetic field into matter in the first harmonic universe. So through their evolution, the first strand of DNA was put together and added into the morphogenetic field, whereby the next strand could be built by the next group of races. Okay. And there's a very strong correlation between DNA strands and dimensions that I may get into this time or not, but it will be in the book. It's kind of complicated to try to explain it. Okay. So the two etheric races evolved on Gaia. The next stage, stage 3, began about 25 million years ago, around the same time that this was something called the Halls of Amenti. And this was a very closely guarded secret for many, many years, especially in ancient Egyptian times, because they knew what it was. Okay? Along with the Halls of Amenti, there is something called the Staff of Amenti. Now, I will try to explain what the Halls of Amenti are. If we remember, we call the Sphere of Amenti, that was the name we gave to the morphogenetic pattern that was set by the Pleiadorians and put into the Earth core, which gave consciousness from the Pleiadorians the ability to manifest through the Earth core and into manifestation on the Earth planet. Well, not only did the Sphere of Amenti set the pattern for the races, it also created a connection between our planetary core in D2, second dimension, and the planetary core in Terra in D5. Within the Sphere of Amenti, the next phase of the seeding of the races involved opening the sphere and creating a portal bridge between D2 and D5 and opening it. That would allow passage between the Earth core and the pre-cataclysmic time frame in Terra, the time before it blew up, because this is when this whole experiment started. They did it before it blew. So they had a time coordinate link up between the Earth's core and that past of the Terran time cycle. This became important later because it was a way to link Terra's past to Terra's future and link back the time cycle to put it back together. All right, now the Halls of Amenti didn't involve just one portal structure. That was the first one to be set. Then there was one portal structure set for each dimension of 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So in the Halls of Amenti, the halls represented 6 portals altogether. The 6 portals, one of the main one was the one that connected Earth core to pre-cataclysmic Terra, and the other 5 connected into each dimension, which meant, now dimensions work like time frames. Okay, if you're in D2, that means you're in a specific space-time location within the time matrix. So what the Halls of Amenti did was create a time portal structure between each of the different various times in dimensions 2 up through 6, where those portals could open into the main portal, beings could evolve back and forth through them, and it would eventually link the past and future of Terra, so the time cycle could be restored. And through this process, the Earth grid would be able to merge back into Terra. And all of the planets in our solar system are also attached to this whole process. Okay, so the main thing with the Halls of Amenti were they were the literal portals that beings needed to pass through. Once they got here, the souls here had to pass through the Halls of Amenti to get out of here. If you were a person who wanted to ascend back to God, you had to go through the Halls of Amenti. There was no other way to leave the first harmonic universe. So the Halls of Amenti were very important because they held our promise of ascension, not only to what we used to be as Turnicians, but beyond that. If we couldn't evolve back to our original morph field, we couldn't evolve beyond it. So the Halls of Amenti were set. Then there was something that was called the Staff of Amenti that was created. The Staff of Amenti was a portion of the whole morphogenetic field that was stored in Terra. Now, a planet stores its morph field in its core. Okay, Terra had what was remaining from its morph field in D5. Because of some of the pole reversals and very intense things that happened after the explosion there, Terra could no longer hold the energy field of its morph field inside of itself. It would have imploded. It had to be removed. And the Elohim and the much higher councils became involved in this. And they literally took a piece of Terra's morph field. They took the whole thing out, broke it into 12 pieces, and put one piece of each of that morph field into the morphogenetic fields at the cores of all of the planets, the 12 planets down here. So they linked the ones that blew up back into that one by putting the original morph field back in to the smaller pieces. And eventually they would all evolve back up together into Terra, and meanwhile Terra draws energy from them. or it wouldn't be able to hold its form. Okay? So the staff of Amenti is something that's called a blue flame. It represents the